Hey everyone, welcome back to Data and Donuts. My name's Aaron. I'm here with my friend and colleague, Alexandra Burrel. Today we're going to talk about a really cool topic called unconscious and implicit bias. I said one topic, but it's like two, but we'll get into that in a little bit. But before we do that, I would like Alexandra to tell us a little bit about herself.
Greetings, Aaron. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to share the space with you today. Again, my name is Alexandra. I am currently the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer at the University of La Verne in La Verne, California. I also do consulting on the side for equity leadership with a couple of different organizations. And I do a lot of work. I'm a licensed professional counselor, so I do counseling and educational advising and consulting on the side as well. So yeah, just a little bit about me, but that's it.
That's awesome. I always think that I'm super busy, but then I just heard that and I was like, just kidding. That's awesome. So cool. We'll have to talk about that someday, all the cool things you're doing.
Yeah,
But
definitely.
cool. So we'll get into the interview today. So it's a very open interview, everyone, as you recall. And so I'll start with the first question. What are unconscious and implicit biases? What are those?
I think that one of the easiest ways to describe this is that it's unintentional. So it's something that we are not always aware that's happening or affecting the way that we operate. Um, Many of which we develop these ideas and these concepts about people, groups, folks that identify similarly based on past experiences, based on the media, based on things that we've heard in the past. So this could be something, one example that I give sometimes is, as a child, I had a really bad experience with someone who identified a certain way. They were very angry and intense in their response to me. And so the way that I reacted to them was one to shy away, and it felt very intimidating in that space. And later in life, when I interacted with someone who identified similar to that person, I felt myself feeling the same. And I literally had associated the same feelings, the same energy that I had previously. I'm talking about the first experience when I was probably 14, 15 years old. And I had carried that into adulthood and literally had the same reaction to the person before they even opened their mouth. But because their stature, their build, the way that he was still about 6'2", 6'3", body build, makeup, the facial structure reminded me of this person. And it literally set me back into the same space that I was in when I was 15. And so unconsciously, my body had did something. My body said, this person is not safe. This person is going to make you feel smaller than who you are. You're going to feel intimidated. I had that in my mind and in my body before he even opened his mouth. And so what I did was that bias, that unconscious bias that I was carrying into the space, kept me from hearing anything he had to say. But it wasn't until later that I realized that was there. So some of the things that I say when we talk about unconscious or implicit biases, number one, everyone has them. So to pretend like it's something that, only the horrible people in the world carry, that's not true. Acknowledging that we have unconscious or implicit bias is natural, and it's something that we all carry and will always have them. It may shift to being something different as time goes on, or in relation to different persons or types of identities, but the reality is we'll always have them. And when we acknowledge that, it's like, okay, now I can say, because I know that I have them, what am I seeing in me when, how am I witnessing my disposition to change and whatnot? So unconscious meaning I don't have control over it. It is not something that I intentionally put into place. It's something that is automatic in me based on my past experiences, based on, again, media. If I see persons enough on the news saying that this type of individual is, a criminal and whatever else, I could be internalizing some things. And when I see a type of individual that is similar to that later, I could then be holding that same type of position with this person. So I think that it's one that is generated unconsciously, which is why it's called unconscious bias. But it doesn't have to stay there. And I think that, having a conversation about what happens once you acknowledge that you have the bias, and then once you acknowledge where the bias lies, what happens next, I think can be also a part of the conversation. But being implicit and unconscious means that It wasn't intentional. It wasn't something that I sought out to do on my own. It was literally crafted based on my experiences, my history, my background, and what I'm seeing on a day-to-day basis, what I'm seeing in commercials, what I'm seeing on social media, how things are being depicted. And that's how I've generated unconsciously an assumption of a group, an assumption or a stereotype. These are the things that carry that into the unconscious bias space.
Well, that's awesome. I think about that myself and I was like, oh, wow, these clothes are really cool. People who wear these are really cool. And then I go and I wear them and I don't feel cool. I'm just teasing. But no, that's a great explanation. It really helps us kind of unpack that. And then when you see those things or it comes to that aha moment of like, oh my God, and I think we all have those.
Well, and one of the other things though, Aaron, is it's not always negative. It's not always negative. Sometimes we have bias based on the things that we like, the things that we love, right? So I am so not into a whole lot of outdoor activity right now. But if someone talked to me about fishing and they, enjoyed fishing or they mentioned it, I probably gave them an extra point in my head and in my heart because my background, like I used to go fishing with my father and my brothers. My mom would never go. She didn't like it. So, but fishing to me reminds me of someone who is rooted, who has patience, who has, exhausted, like it literally connects me to some different things. And unconsciously, I'm more than likely, if someone says that, I'm more than likely thinking, oh, this person has patience. This person more than likely has, exhausted options, because if you're going to use a worm, if you're going to use a minnow, if you're going to use a different, like you literally go through these
Sure.
things trying to, so it's like, so technically it's not always I'm treating them bad because of an unconscious bias or I'm treating them negatively. No, the unconscious bias sometimes can be good. It's like, no, I'm going to automatically assume this person is great and amazing and carries this patience because of my historical context as it pertains to fishing and the patience that goes along with that and whatnot. So thinking about implicit and unconscious bias in a way where it's not always a negative connotation to it, but in general, it's like anytime we make an assumption or create a stereotype, it's wrong, because then we're like putting someone in this box where they can't really show who they are and how they operate. We're already putting them in this box. So it's negative, yes, but it doesn't always have to have that negative connotation. So I don't know if that makes sense.
No, that makes perfect sense. I think about any time I go to like a sports event, a football game, a hockey game, like all these people are my friends. We're friends. I don't know you, but we're great. You must be great people because you agree with my thoughts.
Right.
Cool. So I'll jump to the next question. So as we start thinking about these biases, positive or negative, what impact do they have on our decision making? And specifically, how can it relate to as we help support and engage students?
Okay. So what impact does it have on our decision? So a couple of things. How receptive I am to engaging and partnering with someone determines what bias I'm carrying into the room. So I would say that it could keep you from making some meaningful partnerships and establishing some great collaborations. When it comes to like hiring, it could keep you from considering or it would have you consider someone who might not be right for the job, but you carried a bias because they mentioned that they go cycling every day and you gave them, extra high ratings when they really weren't the best person for the job. So it affects our decision making because it then in turn contributes to literally how we're evaluating our thought process. So now I'm thinking more along the lines of these pieces of the individual as opposed to the holistic person and what they bring to the role, hiring considered. The same thing goes for our students. If I am carrying a bias, if a student comes into my office or I'm considering working with a student who comes from a background of, let's say, we've heard the research tells us that Black and Latinx students don't test well. So if someone comes into my office and they identify as such, I may make an assumption that this student needs help in these areas, as opposed to finding out where they land, giving them the opportunity to share with me what their concerns are. I've already crafted a response in my head. I already know they're coming in because they're having trouble in these areas, right? Or vice versa, I could say something along the lines of our Asian American students who are stereotyped as being great in STEM fields or being great in math. And they could come in and I make the assumption that they are just excelling in this way. And I put all of these things out there where the student no longer feels comfortable sharing with me that they need assistance in this area or they need resources here. So that's one way that I see it come up with working with students on the front lines. I think that it also plays a part in policy when we're talking about policies at institutions. So what are we considering within our own biases? Are we talking test optional? Are we taking away those testing components when we know that some of the terminology and the things that are listed on these standardized tests don't relate to our historically marginalized groups? You're talking about a 4-year. I've never had a 4-year in my life. I don't know what that means. What is that? Like, what is a 4-year? If the question is structured in such a way where I can't understand it, how can I do well on it? So if you're gauging whether or not I will be a great candidate for this institution based on this standardized test that I can't relate to any of the questions, of course I'm going to do poorly on, so how are we looking at it in that way? Are we considering the biases that could be present? And again, hiring or student serving, or even just talking through, I don't want to go here, but I'm going to say it anyway, talking about vaccination policies. And we're carrying different biases as it pertains to that as well. And when I come into the room, who am I thinking about? Who am I considering? Who am I considering within my decision-making process, and what aspects? Is it the stereotypes that I've heard? Is it the bias that I carry? Or is it factual? Is it a way, have I even tapped into my community to find out their needs and what their resources are? Like, those are the things that literally not acknowledging the bias can hinder us from making progress, and we'll stay in the same cycle.
I completely agree. I was like 1,000% agree with so much, almost everything exactly 100% what you said, especially like I'm hearing you saying like the standardized tests. And I'm just thinking, like, God, I hated those. Like sucked at those. Right. I was like, what do you mean when you open it up? Like, no. And I even just, I mean, you're an instructor and so am I, teach part-time, like creating things that provide so many opportunities. And for me, it was never about checking a box with tests. It was always about how do you create that learning opportunity to empower someone to take on a new role, and don't say here's the standard, but let them explore that and tell you what they learned. And that's like, I think what I've learned from a lot of my peer faculty members is they ask for feedback after every assignment, like what worked, what didn't work, what did you use? And they've used that to define their future of what they did. So then you can find out what that is. And for me, like I know a lot of people are going to hate me on this. I hate tests. Everybody. I teach, but I use tests as a study tool, FYI, that you can use open book in my classes, and that's how you help study. So, but yeah, it's really, like you said, meeting the students where they're at and giving them and learning about how they want to learn and how they're comfortable learning, and giving them viable options, and really looking at what's being said. And then even the example you gave, I was like, what is that? And then I thought, I was like, oh, I know what that is. I didn't have one either. It's fine.
Right? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, what? Let me Google that while we're on here.
So funny. Yeah.
But no, it's right on. And so I think that's what we need to really take into account is really thinking about who are we excluding, and even if it's unconscious or not on purpose, what can we do to identify that, and the best thing that I've seen at least do with developing out quizzes, test evaluations, asking people, having the focus groups, having the actual users read and be like, this is ridiculous, Aaron.
Yeah.
Like, what are you talking about? Cassettes and CDs. What do you mean? Right. And so I think those are the types of things that really make for more meaningful and open opportunities for our students. And so that really leads to our next question is, what recommendations do you have for all of us to really uncover or recognize these maybe biases we don't really see or know?
Okay. Well, one thing, I would say paying attention to your body, how your body responds in certain conversations. and when you encounter different types of individuals. So one example that I give sometimes is if you're sitting in the space and someone brings up, let's say, the LGBTQ plus community, or they identify differently, and your body does something, where your stomach does something, maybe the hairs on your arms, right, right,
Yeah.
your body language becomes closed off, and you automatically shut down, where you no longer hear what they're saying because you don't identify the same. Once we realize, when we're being more conscious of the way our body responds in conversation about certain topics and around certain individuals, we can start to pinpoint, well, what made me uncomfortable in that setting? What made me respond the way that I did? Something is not one, it could be that I lack information or an understanding of this group or this population, or there's some negative things, some unconscious bias, there's something, some stereotypes that I'm holding on to that make me react in that way, where I have to get on defense, or I've been conditioned to be on defense. So a couple of things is, when we notice our body responding differently, number one, I start to assess, like, what am I doing and why am I doing? What was that in response to? Once I can pinpoint what made me uncomfortable, or what aspect of the conversation, or what group or what piece made me uncomfortable, it is now conscious. It is now explicit. And if I continue without doing work in that area, now it's no longer an unconscious or implicit bias, where I can say, it's okay to have that, right? I can't say that anymore, because now I am aware that I hold that, and it's affecting the way that I respond to individuals and the decisions that I make. So now I have to consciously make an effort to better inform myself, to correct this, to be more intentional. Well, am I making this decision based on my discomfort around this population? And the conscious effort has to be daily. Some folks say, well, it's a daily decision. I get up and I work out. It's a daily decision. It literally has to be a daily decision that I say, you know what? I know that these are the areas that I'm uncomfortable. These are some areas that I need to be better informed in. I need to make a conscious effort daily to make sure that my response to a person who identifies, my response to this conversation, or the way that I weigh in on this decision, is not held hostage by my bias, period. Bias, not unconscious, not implicit. I'm just talking bias, right? Because at some way, shape, or form, I have them. So why am I saying yes or no to this concept? Or why am I being more harsh in my tone, in my delivery? Why am I being more closed off to this person or to this opportunity? Is it because I'm holding something there? So once I realize that I'm reacting differently, we know ourselves. Like, we know when we've been in a space and it made us uncomfortable. We know that. Well, what about the space made us uncomfortable? Who was in the space, or what was said in the space, or what was the vibe there that made me uncomfortable? And now that I know that, now that I can pinpoint that, now I need to unpack that. What does that mean for me? Does that mean that I need more information? Does that mean that I have a past experience that's still plaguing me? Like, what is it? And once we start to do that, we can start making more of a conscious effort to make better decisions, equitable decisions, being more inclusive in the way that we interact with folks, being more welcoming, more loving, period. Like why not? Right. But there's no excuse. Once you get to that point, there's no excuse. But if you are being intentionally ignorant and closing off to those areas, you will remain in that space and continue to enable those inequities, that discrimination, that power, that privilege, all of those things that we've been fighting to dismantle for so long. The more we turn off our high beams to it, and we say, you know what, I didn't see that, I'm not going to pay attention, I'm not going to give that my energy. Well, no, it deserves our energy. So I'm really hoping that as people start to notice their bodies and to pay attention to, and I'm just talking about self, I'm not talking about other folks, I'm talking about self, because really, if I don't have me together, I can't contribute to any space that I'm in. So I'm recognizing what my body is doing in response and in certain areas. So when I can do that, I can bring about change.
I agree, and especially in a level like, for example, yourself or even myself in my job, people are looking to you and they watch how you behave. Maybe not just even what you say, but what your non
Verbal.
yeah,
Yeah.
I was getting there. Non-verbal communication when they leave. Thank you. I needed that. Because I was like non-verbal communication really tells the story and really tells your thoughts. Like,
Yeah.
are you closed off to that? Are you discounting somebody? And as a leader, are people going to follow your leadership or your influence and do the same thing and
Mhm.
continue to exhibit that? And so,
Yep.
but on the other end of the spectrum, if they see that you're open, welcoming, and inclusive, and not just encouraging, but the word I'm looking for is sorry, I'm lost on words on this, but what I see is when you recognize and acknowledge, you give the acknowledgement of somebody, regardless if you agree or disagree with their question or
Yeah.
statement or whatever,
Mhm.
acknowledge them as quality. I think because you can say, I hear you. And first of all, I hate when someone says, I hear you. I know you hear me.
Right.
But acknowledge it as quality and that it contributed. Maybe it didn't contribute to the vision you had, but it contributed to the conversation. It carries a really long way. And I think some of the things you just brought up, I was just sitting here just self-reflecting, thinking on what have I done? But you think about that, like every meeting you're in, you're just like, oh my God. But no, it's good to continually reflect on that. And it's like that almost self-evaluation.
Yeah.
And I think about that as what we do on a day-to-day basis. And the more you start recognizing that, it becomes a natural process. And when you recognize, like, hey, when someone talks about this, why does it make me uncomfortable? And I think self-questioning and being just honest with yourself, like, why is that? Is because maybe I don't know as much as I do, right? And then you're just like, oh God, and then you spiral on that for a bit. But I think that's where we need to get to that place of not just vulnerability, but openness with ourselves. Because, like you said, you have to take care of yourself before you can contribute. And if you have that, you won't be able to reach your full potential and to really leave that in others. So these have been some great conversations. And typically how this is set up, I don't like ping back and forth, but it's just been so engaging. I was like, oh my God, I can't not say something.
I love it. I love it.
So cool. So it was last bonus question. So
Okay.
my bonus question of today is, what's your favorite donut?
I would say anything with glaze.
There you go. Perfect.
Well, I would say like a Krispy Kreme, but I like anything with a glaze could probably get me.
Yeah, I know it's so difficult for me driving by one every day. I'm like, just 5 minutes, I'll grab one. Right?
And if the hot light is on, it's
Oh
like,
yeah.
oh my
Oh
goodness.
yeah, that's a dozen right there. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Alexander, for hanging out today, for having a fun conversation. And I'd love to catch up with you more about some of the cool things you're doing. So I hope you have a great day and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks for having me.